Hello, I'm Amira Armond from Kieri Solutions, and we're introducing the Kieri Compliance Documentation, which is a set of templated documents to help you run a CMMC compliant information system. And we also have Jill Wright from my team, who is a CMMC provisional assessor, provisional instructor, subject matter expert. And we're just gonna kind of tag team this demo and show you what we got. Cool. So if you decide that you want to purchase a license, this is the website that you would use to download each document. And you can see that we've got quite a few documents here, including procedures, forms, and workflows down at the bottom. So when you get a license, it comes with a 12-month subscription to log in and download the most up-to-date version of each of these documents. The documents are good the way they are. What the subscription gives you is if there's a CMMC version 3 that comes out or a CMMC version 4 that comes out, our plan is to update all the documents for that new version of CMMC. And you'd probably want to download new versions at that point. Now, if you're wondering what has changed between one version and the next, we have a version control document here, which basically we give very detailed notes anytime we change one of the documents so that you can see what changed. So that if you've already been using the document, you've customized it for yourself, you might want to just pull in the sections that changed, or you might decide it's not worth changing anything. You already like it the way you have it, and that's totally fine. This helps you choose between them. So let's look at the databases first. One thing that the KCD does differently from pretty much every other document package is we really focus on record keeping and creating proof that you are doing all of the required activities of CMMC. So if you're going to have a bunch of books of records, you need a bookshelf. And that's what these databases are for. So what we've done is we've picked out the information that we think is very important to capture as part of your compliance program. And we've defined databases which you can use. Now you could put this into SharePoint, you could create an Access database. If you're not technical, if you're going to struggle with a more mainstream database, for most of these documents, you can actually just use the Excel spreadsheet itself as your database. And this helps make sure that you're capturing the information that CMMC needs for each of these different areas, your accounts, your software, your hardware, your incidents. Now, you'll see a couple things that we do. First off, anytime you see a yellow highlight, that's an instruction. All right, and you'd probably want to read it, take action if needed, and then delete the instruction off of your final documents. Anytime you see light gray text, that's example text. So we put examples all through the documents to try and show you what it should look like. We don't expect it to match you. So you're going to want to replace this example text with something that fits your environment, of course. But we do find it very useful to kind of show you what a real life example would look like. Now, one of the things that we're asked a lot is, do we have to use these databases? No. If you've got a different ticket system or service management system, by all means, use it. That's totally fine. But review the databases anyways, especially the columns, the things that are asked for, and make sure that your current system captures this information. So for example, with this software inventory database, it turns out that mobile code is one of the key things that you want to capture alongside your applications. This is the right place to capture what mobile code is authorized for each application. So you'd want to make sure that whatever you're using, you either type in the mobile code in the notes or create another field just for that. Jill, do you have any questions or thoughts on the databases?
You may want to mention why, uh, someone would use the account management database instead of, using just exporting accounts from Active Directory, because I do get that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So we recommend having a separate, on paper or in a database list of your accounts. And the reason for that is because this shows that you are authorizing the accounts that should exist. It shows that you're actively managing the permissions assigned to the accounts. And it also gives you the ability to check a lot of little requirements that you can't check as part of your Active Directory, for example. So, this database gives you the ability to make sure that the person's gotten training, that they've signed their user agreements, that they've gone through background screening before you issue an account. And it also lets you put dates onto some of these things so that if it's something that expires after a year and you need to have your user retake it, which users are expiring when, so you can send them an email or ask them to do more training. The other reason is that, as assessors, Jill and I understand that sometimes bad guys break in. And one of the first things they do is they will go into your directory and create their own account so that you're not necessarily seeing that they're doing weird activities with an account that they stole the credentials for. So we never really assume that Active Directory is an authorized list. It's your actual list. It's who's got accounts, but we don't know for sure that each of those accounts should be there. So that's why it's really nice to have a separate list, and it really does help you reconcile over time. Okay, so next we're going to look at the policies, and I'll show you the biggest policy we have and the smallest policy. So this is the largest policy we have. It's 8 pages long. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to show you all of it, but I'll kind of click around to show you the highlights. So these documents are meant to be managed by a 1 to 2 person IT department. It's meant to be as user-friendly as possible. It's meant to use simple language wherever possible. So these are all just Word documents or Excel files, which, is very easy to edit. You're not going to have to try and export or recreate them if you want to go to a different system. It's just Office. So we have the standard stuff of, the purpose, the scope. You'll see that we've put in variable names for things that, you'll definitely want to replace and customize. And the idea is that you're going to read through these policies line by line, hopefully with a CMMC expert. And make sure that you're either doing them and you agree with them, or if you have a different way that's still good, customize them slightly to meet whatever you're doing. Or if you're not doing the policy item, but you should be, that's when you create a plan of action record, which is, a to-do item. Now, you'll see, this is pretty plain language. We give explanations inside the policy, right? It's not very enterprise class, but it makes it a lot more usable. And again, you'll see explanations throughout. And we're trying to get it somewhere in between a very high level policy and more of a standard where, this is how you're actually going to do it for your environment. Now, at the bottom of the policy, we have the standard fields, related documents, roles and responsibilities. We'll say these have to comply with the CMMC, your revision history, and then this is where you say this is a policy that needs to be followed, and you get a signature, which assessors really like to see that signature saying that we are going to do the policy. Now, that was the biggest policy we have. The smallest one we have is the vulnerability and patch management policy. And again, should look very, very similar, same basic sections, scope, and then section 4 is where we get into each of the specific policy items. Now, one thing that a lot of our clients bring up that they like is that the documents they're prescriptive, which means we tell you, do this within 30 days, do this within 60 days. We say do it monthly, right? So we don't expect you to try and figure this out from scratch. We tell you what is a pretty safe amount of time or a pretty safe requirement. And if you need to back it off, you can just, make sure that you don't get yourself in trouble. If you want to make it more stringent, you can. But in most cases, you should be safe just accepting these numbers if you're not sure what else to do. And then, at the end of the policy, we've got the same related documents, roles and responsibilities, signature, etc. Any thoughts from you, Jill, on the policies?
Not really. I just, as an assessor, I think that it's really important that people know that the revision history is important, because a lot of people forget, and you end up with policies that say they were last updated in 2012. So I always remind people that that is an important part.
That's a really good point. When us assessors, we've been trained that if a policy hasn't been reviewed in more than a year, we almost have to reject the policy, which is a big problem, because those are one of the ways that you meet a lot of the CMMC requirements is by having things written down in your policies. Okay, next up is the user agreements. So these should be pretty standard, for most IT departments. Most IT departments have user agreements. So the information system user agreement is super standard. You need to use a complex password. You should not let other people log into your computer. We might monitor what you do on our information system. You shouldn't perform criminal actions using our email, for example. The agreement that's very different from the rest, that's unique to our program, is the Protection of Sensitive Information Agreement, which is it's very specific to FCI, federal contract information, and CUI, controlled and classified information. And it's basically a combination of training as well as rules for your users on how to protect CUI. So we go into, defining what FCI is. It's not highly sensitive, but you should keep it on our system. You shouldn't, work on FCI at your house, on your personal computer, but otherwise it's not a big deal. But then we have a section for CUI where you can customize this to exactly list off the types of CUI that you use, such as aerospace information, control technical information. And then you can break it down even simpler. This is what it looks like for us. It looks like a airplane schematic. It looks like a diagram of a missile booster. So it's easy for your users to understand what is CUI for you. And then we get into how to label. Right. So again, this is a combination of training as well as rules. And then as we go further in, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. This is how you're going to share CUI for your organization. You definitely want to customize it. This section, you might say the way that we share CUI is using this secure file share or this solution. And you'll write it in there so that your users know this is how you do it, which is a very, very important pro tip for CMMC. You want to tell people, here's the 1 or 2 ways that you can share CUI correctly so that they don't come up with their own method, which might not be secure. And then we have more protection stuff. Don't copy it to DVDs and CDs. This is how you return it to the IT department for sanitization, or this is how you transport it as needed. And then a little bit more, I'm not going to show you all of it, but if you go down to the bottom, we have standard blurbs. You need to follow this. You might get fired if you don't. And this is where the employee or your user would sign it, and you would collect these user agreements from them as part of the onboarding process. This is used as proof for about 20 different assessment objectives that your users understand how to, transmit CUI using correct channels. They know not to use portable media, various other things. So it's very important proof, and it's also a way of getting everyone on the same page. Any questions or thoughts, Jill?
You may want to point out, that we have different types of variables and the instructions that are, in each document, how those are, what they look like.
Okay. Well, let me do that with the next document then. So this administrative processes document, this is the longest process document that we have. So these are all the things that your IT department knows how to do, that they do every day, but nobody wrote down the process for them. So we've got the process, a generic process that should be appropriate for most companies listed out in here for each item. And what Jill was saying is we've got variables listed, right? So generally our variables are bold, they're all caps, and they have the angle brackets around them. And the idea is that you definitely want to customize those sections at the very, very least. Even if you think everything else in this is perfect and you want to do it exactly the way it's written, you want to customize, you know, your company XYZ, which is your company's name. You know, this title might be your HR manager. It might be the president of your company if you're tiny. It might be, you know, your hiring manager, depending on the company. So you're generally going to have, you know, certain people that do certain types of things. You're going to have the HR person. You're going to have your IT manager, your security officer, the president of the company, and you can use these variables to find where you need to customize for a specific type of title. We also have minor variables, which are pretty much just, hey, you know, this is the only time we use this variable is for this specific sentence, but you really do need to customize based on what you do. So for example, this one that talks about, you know, the name of your background checking service. If you use Good Hire, you might just write Good Hire here. If you use a different background check, you know, maybe backgrounds 1, 2, 3, right? You'd write that in here instead. Now, we also very, very commonly use a placeholder for the CIO and CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer versus the Chief Information Officer. We've defined those two key roles throughout all of the documents because they help you prove that you're doing separation of duties correctly, which is one of the harder things to do with CMMC. And the way we envision CIO, it's your main IT person. It's the person who is in charge of your systems and the functionality of your systems. Well, your CISO, your Chief Information Security Officer, they are more of a part-time person who is overseeing cybersecurity for you. And they're not necessarily working on the system every day. You know, they're not necessarily concerned with functional stuff or, you know, making sure the users can work. What that CISO is doing is making sure that when there's a change to the system, that it's reviewed to make sure that you won't harm your security. They're reviewing the activities of your privileged people to make sure that they're authorized, you know, and operating within what they're supposed to be doing. And then that CISO is normally performing some level of audit log reviews for you. You'd want to change these variables to whatever the title of that person is, right? So the CIO might be IT manager. The CISO could be your virtual CISO, or it could be your security officer, or it could be, you know, your log specialist or your audit specialist, right? So it doesn't really matter what the titles are. What's more important is that you have this, the responsibilities laid out very clearly. Does that answer it, Jill?
It does.
Okay. So with the administrative processes, as well as the system security plan, One of the pro tips is to use the navigation pane so that you can see each of the headers. And, these are all the different processes that you would perform to operate your IT department according to CMMC. And these are referenced, over and over and over again as proof that you were performing CMMC practices. And when in doubt, you come here and you follow them to do it correctly. Okay, next up, our program, we've got two very important pillars. We have tasks that you perform to solve problems that occur over time on their own. And that's the Cybersecurity Maintenance Checklist. And then we have tasks that you perform to solve problems that you create by accident through your privileged activities. And that is the Change Approval Board meeting notes template. So let's look at the maintenance checklist first. I think that we're the only compliance documentation group that has really identified, here's the things you need to do to stay compliant over time. Here's the activities you need to do. And what we've done, I'll zoom in a bit. I'm not going to show you this entire spreadsheet, but I'll show you enough. We've identified, say, 8 tasks that you should do every week, which are addressing the highest risk, most likely to go wrong things, right? So what's most likely to go wrong? Well, there might be a new vulnerability discovered and bad guys are attacking your network in a new way. So you should definitely be checking that at least once a week. You might have new vulnerabilities on your computers. You should be checking that once a week. You should make sure that you're still capturing audit logs from your devices and that nobody has connected an unauthorized device to your network. Right? That's one of your highest risk items. And it happens fairly regularly. Users are bad. They'll bring a personal tablet or a home computer and try and get it on the network, or more likely they'll connect to your email from their personal cell phone, and maybe you haven't authorized it. So you need to be on top of these. Now on the right side, we've got an area for detailed procedures to do the task. These are pre-written for a small company that uses Microsoft 365. If you don't use Microsoft 365, that's fine. You'll need to customize these technical procedures. But if you do, a lot of this is pre-written for you as an example. Now, we have tasks that are weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual. And the idea is that every week, you're going to do all of the weekly tasks. And in a small company like mine, that takes about 30 minutes to do all these weekly tasks. And then the first week of the month, you're going to do the weekly tasks and you will do the monthly tasks. So the monthly, right here we go with the monthly tasks. And that's going to take, for a small company, about 3 hours. And the reason for that big jump is because you're going to be doing a change approval board meeting, which takes about 1 hour for 2 people. And this is a very, very important meeting to do, which we'll talk about next. Now, and then for the rest of that month, you'll do weekly, 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 and then another monthly plus weekly, and then weekly, weekly, weekly. And then the first week of the quarter, you'll do weekly, monthly, and quarterly tasks, which will take about 6 hours total. And then you go back to weekly again, right? So By the time you get to annual tasks, I'll scoot on down to the annual tasks. These annual tasks are very time intensive, which is one reason why we only do them once a year. And because they're so time intensive, you should probably expect to spend between 1 to 2 weeks doing a full annual checklist, which includes all of the annual, biannual, quarterly, monthly, and weekly tasks. But that's CMMC. There's not a whole lot we can do about it, but at least we know all the things we need to do on schedule. Jill, any thoughts on this?
I was just going to point out that this also has variables to change so that it's customized for the company. So just sort of the same kind of thing. And I was going to point out that when you start saving these, it's like a treasure trove of evidence. So you end up with 52 spreadsheets.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's the major important thing here is that you have a ton of evidence to show an assessor.
Mhm. Yeah, so let me expand on that a little bit.
Mhm.
The idea is that you're going to create a copy of this document for every week, and you're going to date the title of it, date the name of the file. And every week you start a new spreadsheet. And, most of them you're just going to be doing the weekly tasks. But, say the first week of April, you'd be doing the weekly, monthly, and quarterly tasks. And when you're getting assessed, the assessor is going to say, are you doing a certain practice, right? Maybe they'll say, are you capturing baselines? And your system security plan says one of the ways that we capture baselines is, biannually, we run a task to capture the baselines from our devices. So you can say, okay, well, this is a once every 6 months thing, and I do it every January and July. So I'm going to go back to my records and I'm going to find either the July or the January maintenance checklist, and we're going to open it up. And it's going to actually show your notes from that task. So I just switched over to an example tab, which we include for this, so you can see what a real one looks like. And you'll be able to show that on the 14th of January, you captured a baseline for everything, right? You actually, in this case, it's notes saying that we did this, a few weeks ago, so we don't have to do it again. But that all of this is really, really good evidence for an assessor that shows that you've been doing these items repeatedly, with maturity, with dedication. It makes assessors very happy. All right, the next key item we have is the CAD meeting notes template. This is primarily for change management, but it also helps you show that you are doing separation of duties and several key activities related to monitoring your own privileged users to make sure they're not doing something wrong, which is a big part of CMMC. So like the Cybersecurity Maintenance Checklist, you're going to create a new copy of this this document every time you have the meeting, which is typically going to be once a month. You're going to date stamp it. And this is meant to be a meeting between the IT manager and your security officer, which could be the CIO and the CISO. It could be your main IT lead plus a virtual CISO. It could be your IT lead plus the president of the company. it's showing that you have that separation of duties, that there's multiple people involved. So section 1 is looking for escalation items, stuff where you should be doing something and you're not. So this first one is saying, hey, do you have a current out of compliance system, right? Or you're not doing something that's required by CMMC. Well, let's talk about it every single month until it gets resolved. This next one asks, do you have a vulnerability that hasn't been patched according to policy, right? So it's not, oh, we have a new vulnerability every week. That's fine. We don't have to talk about that. This is talking about vulnerabilities that for some reason you can't fix them. And now we need to talk about, hey, should we take the system offline? Right? Should we take a drastic measure? Should we migrate to a different type of system? Now, section 2, I'm not going to show you all of it, but section 2 is a traditional change management set of questions. Let's review proposed changes. Let's show that we talked through the security impacts and approved them or not approved them. And then also review changes that have been in progress or completed recently to make sure that there's no leftover activities that we need to do. The third section is oversight of privileged activity. So that's, again, making sure that your admins are not going rogue. They're doing things the way they're supposed to do it, according to procedures, according to their roles. So you're just going to review, have we added new IT people? Why did we add them? Is it a good idea? And then your security officer is going to review audit logs and incidents to make sure that your privileged people are not doing bad work, essentially. And then finally, we have a security control review, which is essentially a very small self-assessment for CMMC that you do every quarter. And it's one of the CMMC requirements that is the most misunderstood. So we really try and help you and make this easy. So what we've done is we've identified specific CMMC requirements which are more likely to fail than others. And we say you should check these every quarter, right? Self-assess them every quarter. And then talk about your results during the CAB meeting with your security officer. So it's meeting a CMMC requirement to do ongoing monitoring of controls, but it reduces a lot of the guesswork and the misunderstanding around it. And it makes it pretty doable as opposed to trying to figure out which items make sense for you to do every quarter, from scratch. And of course, you can update these. So if you are having an issue where, say one of these requirements, it's not working well and you need to double check it more often, you could just add the requirement to this list so that you review it every quarter officially. Any thoughts, Jill?
The only thing I would say is that in that section, when they're going through all of the requirements, you don't have to talk about all of the ones that are okay in the meeting. You can. It's something that you would do before you actually get in the meeting. I think some people misunderstand and they're like, "Oh, this meeting is going to take forever because I've got to go through all these practices during the meeting," and that's not really how it should be done. um, do it beforehand and come in with the results and talk about the stuff that needs improvement to bring it back into compliance.
That's a great point. Yeah, so the intent is not for you to be testing and examining and interviewing to self-assess each of these items during your CAB. You'd want to have, say, your CIO or your security officer do that self-assessment, and then you discuss it during the CAB so that everybody knows what's going on and they know that, say this one isn't working and let's figure out how to fix it together. But you don't need to go through all the good ones. Yep, great point. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top, the best for last. We have a FIPS Validation Strategy and Risk Assessment document, which, again, to my knowledge, is completely unique to the Kieri Compliance Documentation. And essentially, the reason why we wrote this document is because the requirement for FIPS 140-2 validated cryptography is, I think it's safe to say it's like the #1 pain point for compliance for CMMC. And my theory on why this is so painful is not because the technical solution is really hard, but because it's really difficult for people to figure out how to describe what they're doing and how to prove that they're using FIPS validated modules to do encryption. So we've written out an entire document, it's 13 pages, which is relevant to Windows 10 and Office 365. And it also goes into some encryption for the Outlook app, for iPhones, and for Android phones. And you can take this structure and add more to it. So if you have MacBooks, you can follow this exact structure and add the details for the MacBooks in the same tables right underneath Windows 10. But it helps you understand what you need to talk about, how you need to talk about it, and what proof you need to give. So for example, this table talks about where CUI is stored and how you're protecting it. And let's see, down here, we've got links to the actual certificates that NIST provides to show that these are FIPS validated modules. So if you're using this technology, your work's basically done, which is one of the worst documents that you have to put together for evidence. If you're not, it's a lot easier in that you know what you need to do to prove that you're doing it correctly. Any thoughts on that, Jill?
Not really. I just think that, it is very helpful um, to actually know what evidence you need to show, because I think, that really is a big deal for people. They know that they have a solution and that it works, but it is, they don't know how to show proof of it. And whenever I go through this document with clients, this is one of the ones that they're like really happy about, you know.
Yep, yep. Yeah, it's pretty easy to turn on the cryptography for, like Windows, and if you're using certain clouds, it's just on there automatically. But it's hard to know how to show that to an assessor. One of the reasons why we actually made the KCD public, period, why we thought this might be a good product, is because when Kieri Solutions went through our CMMC assessment by the government, which is something that's required to become a certified third-party assessment organization, they told us that the FIPS document, the one that I just showed you, was the best documentation about FIPS that they had ever seen from any company they had ever reviewed. And that's including big companies, you know, the GDITs and Raytheons of the world. So I was pretty proud of that. Okay, so the system security plan, this is, I think, again, the best system security plan template out there by leaps and bounds, and I'll show you why. This is heavily based on the NIST system security plan template that NIST provides for free for 800-171, but we've updated pretty much every single section of it to add instructions, to add examples, and to write in how the KCD documents help you meet each practice before you even have to start. So a lot of your work is done already. So section 1, you know, this should look familiar for pretty much any system security plan where you need to identify the name of your system, you know, a unique identifier. But you'll see that we have gray examples. You know, if you're not sure what to put, here's some examples. We have a lot of instructions. So all this yellow is instructions. You know, when it comes to identifying who somebody should be, you know, what people you identify. Again, we put a lot of instructions in because this is one of the most confusing parts of an SSP, it turns out. Now, we also talk about your CUI, your information, right? And we give examples of how you could describe it. And the idea is, again, you just update the tables, you know, most of the format is already there. You're not going to have to think, do I need to add more information, you know, that's not even mentioned here. We're trying to talk to subjects that are going to match almost any small or medium company. The system environment, you know, we've got, again, topics that are important to just about any company. And wherever we can, we put in example text, right? So for example, for the subject of internet, if you have no physical facility, if everyone's a work from home, you could just take this paragraph and you could change the color to black and you could say that, you know, correctly describes us, right? Or if you do have a physical facility, well, then you should probably talk about, you know, your utility provider and the speed in your SSP. Same thing for wireless, you know, same thing for firewall, lots of example text to try and, so you don't have to come up with it on your own. You know what we need to talk about, you just alter it to fit your environment. And then let's go into the specific requirements of CMMC, which is the part that I'm super proud of. So we've got the normal stuff that you would expect for each of the CMMC requirements, where you have the practice ID, you have the practice statement, you know, the blocks where you can mark whether it's implemented or not. But from here, we've added a bunch. So first off, we have added cross mappings from other frameworks, such as 853, which is used for FedRAMP clouds. So if you're using a cloud that is FedRAMP authorized and you're looking at their audit reports, you can map between that cloud's security controls and the CMMC controls using these cross references. We have put in a recommendation for the responsible party. And again, we're gearing this towards very small companies. So it's probably going to be either CIO or CISO. And for most of this, it's going to be the CIO, right? That's your main IT person. And the CISO is generally a part-time person. We've put in the assessment objectives for each practice. So this is super, super important. And no matter, even if you watch this demo and you decide you're going to go do your own thing, that's fine. Please make sure that you put the assessment objectives really close to where you're addressing them in the SSP, because there's 320 of these things right now for CMMC version 2. And from personal experience, I can tell you that after you have updated your SSP for 3 days straight, and you've gone all the way to the very end, right, and you think you're done, if you don't have these assessment objectives right here, you're going to miss one or two. You're just going to forget to talk to it. And that 1 or 2 assessment objectives that you just forget to address, you're likely to just fail CMMC outright based on it. It's CMMC is very, very stringent, and missing one assessment objective of a highly important practice, which is, I think, more than half of them, will cause you to outright fail your assessment. So don't take that chance, right? You want to make sure you get all of them. Okay, so anyways, here's where the documentation package really starts shining, because if the KCD templates address a practice, we put it in here for you. And we tag it with which assessment objective is handled by that document or that template or that procedure. This is also where we map between sections of a policy and the specific CMMC requirements is in the SSP. So during your assessment, the assessor is going to be able to read this, and they'll go, okay, I need to go read section 4.1 of the access management policy, and that tells me that authorized users are identified and system access is limited to authorized users. Right. This is the best practice way to write a system security plan. Assessors love it, and if you do your system security plan at this level of detail, it's very hard to miss a practice, because it's forcing you to be very specific to exactly what each sentence is talking to, so that you're not going to misinterpret or talk to the wrong thing. So this is one practice, right? And all the ways that the KCD helps you meet this practice. I'll click through a couple more. I don't want to show you all of them. Right, so again, we're referencing the policy. Down here, we have an example of how you might talk about, a certain device type or a certain system for assessment objective C, which is a very technical thing, right? So we don't know what you're doing, but you do want to have a statement, something like this, for each of your devices. Unsuccessful logon attempts. When it gets very technical, where it's going to be different for each environment, we tend to write it as an example, or we let you fill it out yourself. But if it has to do with a policy, a procedure, a database, then we would write it in this this black text where hopefully you can just accept it. So we've counted up the non-examples, the ones that are black text, and there's more than 240 out of the 320 assessment objectives are addressed, at least partially, through the KCD. And in a lot of cases, you're just meeting a requirement, right? So for example, A is defined. It's defined. You just met this assessment objective by simply using the template. We also have the non-federal organization controls, the NFO controls, which some of you might know about, some of you might not. These are not generally assessed, but they're good building blocks for security. So we've listed them out. And if it's something that the KCD addresses, we talk about it. If it's not, we leave them blank. The technical ones, the very technical ones, we don't generally have much for, right? But if it's a policy-based item, we do. The appendixes are for you to put information that is referenced by multiple practices, or it's just too much information to put into the response to a certain practice. So I'm not going to show you all the appendixes, but Appendix B is used to run a mature self-assessment program. And it includes example tests for the assessment objectives that are based on procedures or policies. If it's highly technical, again, we don't know what you're doing, so we won't have a test plan for it. But this helps you do a good quality self-assessment. Appendix C shows you what you should have identified for some of the logging requirements and gives you examples. So I think that's all I want to show of the SSP. Jill, do you have anything that I should point out, or?
Not really. I was gonna just say, this is a huge thing that our clients jump for joy over, and I think it's, when you download a template, like just the NIST template, you're staring blankly at this completely blank template, and you don't want to do anything to it. You don't know what to do. So this has so much detail. Um, it's a huge. It saves so much time. Um, and time is money, of course. um,
Good point.
but
Yep.
also, as an assessor, this has spoiled me so much because it's when you're actually referencing your assessment objectives and showing exactly the section of policy that is um, you know related to whatever you're trying to meet. It's easy to find. It also saves assessor time. That's always a good thing. um, and I think the last thing I was going to note is that the appendix that has the self-assessment test and things like that, give that to the assessors
Oh
because
yeah.
those are tests that they can use, and what the results are going to be. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. And generally assessors are going to want to copy whatever you use for testing
Yep.
instead of coming up with their own, because that takes more work
Yep.
and it might be unfair.
Hmm.
They might be looking for something that doesn't match what your system is. Great points. So the it's kind of crazy to even mention this, but the system security plan, we're actually this week we're adding a bunch more examples. We're doing a big revision of this thing. So the page count's going to go up, but the template is 177 pages right now. And that's largely because, we've got these requirements pre-filled out for you. And we also have that Appendix B, which has all the self-tests. That's about 50 pages long, so that's a pretty big chunk. But this is worlds above what most companies do for their SSP. And it is a lot faster to go through and update when it's, mostly pre-written than when you're trying to figure it out, with just a blank table. Well, cool. Thank you, Jill.
Sure. And one last thing I just thought of, with the SSP, it's the most important thing. You won't get through a readiness review or, scoping if your SSP, isn't good. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. With our, when we're doing CMMC assessments, we get so many companies come to us and say they want to be CMMC certified. We're ready to be certified. And we ask them, can you show us your SSP? And they show us like an Excel spreadsheet that has like 10 pages of text, right? And for each practice, it's not talking to the assessment objectives. We might see 1 or 2 sentences per practice. And then we're like, we don't know how they're doing something. If it says you have an automatic lockout on failed login attempts, and that's the requirement, and their response is, we do this. Okay. Right? Like, I can't assess you if that's what your SSP says. Like, I don't even know where to start. So we typically have to reject companies if they don't get into the level of detail that we need. And by the way, just to make it clear to everyone, if you get the KCD, Kieri Solutions cannot assess you for real. We can help you with consulting. We can help you customize. We can do, an informal assessment to see if you're ready, but we can't do the real thing on you because the KCD is considered consulting because we're giving you so much assistance.